Welcome to WorkSpan TV. I'm Allison Avalos.
And I'm Rose Stanley.
Today we're talking about the recently published Survey on Workplace Flexibility. Rose, can you start off by talking about the prevalence of flexible work arrangements today? Are there some programs more common than others?
Yes, I think there are, Allison, and they haven't changed much from the 2010 survey that we did. First, I'd like to say that on average, there are 6 programs that companies are offering. The top programs are in the teleworking, the flex time, and in the part-time, with over 80% of those organizations offering those types of programs. For exempt employees, the top programs are teleworking on an ad hoc basis, a combination tailored to your needs, flex time, and phased return from leave. And the top programs that are offered to non-exempt employees are part-time, phased return from leave, shift flexibility, which we actually saw a good increase in this year, and compressed work weeks, which is interesting because we actually saw a decline in compressed work weeks, but only in the 980 plans. The 410 plans are still quite prevalent.
In recent months, there have been reports that some of the larger organizations have scaled back in their use of flexibility. Can you talk about whether the survey confirmed or denied a possible trend away from flexibility?
Actually, we were very interested in that question, so we specifically asked organizations if they had scaled back. And what we found overall is that no, they really haven't. We have a range over all of the flexible schedules that we have listed in the survey, that 1 to 3% of those organizations did scale back in the last 2 years. However, when we look at specifically teleworking, which seemed to be what was in the news most prevalently, was that only 2% of those organizations actually scaled back. So 90-some% of organizations are still offering that telework program.
So we know from the survey that about 88% of organizations are offering at least one type of telework. Clearly, flexibility has taken a hold in the total rewards package that's typically offered to employees. Is there concern that as some of these larger, more notable companies make changes in terms of scaling back their flexibility, that others might just blindly follow?
Initially, there was certainly a lot of chatter about that. There was a lot of blogs, a lot of articles written, and a lot of people talking about whether this was going to be the end of teleworking. We did see some things being scaled back, but what I would say is that one thing we're finding is that organizations are starting to be a little bit more strategic about what they're offering. So in as much as they may have followed what other popular organizations were or were not doing, I think now what they're doing is really saying, let's be a little bit more strategic about what makes sense for us.
We asked participants to rate themselves in terms of the degree of flexibility culture in place at their organization. What did we learn about organizations who are maybe farther along on that spectrum in comparison to those who maybe are in the early stages of flexibility?
What we did find is actually the same thing that we found in 2010, is that they really reap the biggest rewards. On average, those organizations that rate themselves as having a more flexible culture for their flexibility programs is that they actually will have, on average, 7 programs, where the overall average is 6 programs. They also, the higher that they rate themselves on that spectrum, they have lower turnover. And overwhelmingly, they also have higher engagement, higher motivation, and higher satisfaction of their employees. Most of these organizations that rate themselves higher on that spectrum will have a formal policy in place. They have more manager training, which, by the way, is still very lacking even in those established cultures. Only 17% of organizations are offering any type of training to their managers and how to manage a flexible workforce. And that seems to be a key indicator of whether you're going to be successful or not. So most of those organizations that rated themselves higher on the flexibility scale did more training.
You mentioned training. Research often reveals opportunities. Training sounds like one of those opportunities. What other opportunities do we learn about with regards to flexibility?
Definitely training would be probably the one thing that I would say organizations really need to think about implementing. I know that it seems to be a side note, but in all of the organizations that I've talked to that have added training for their managers have found much more success. And it's not just training on how to administer a flexibility schedule, it's really helping those managers understand the reasoning behind why we have these programs in place. I know of some organizations that actually have managers initiate the flex within their organizations, within their departments, and it makes them more in charge. It makes them not only a better manager, but it makes them a better leader. I think another aspect that you want to consider is to perhaps put it in your marketing when you're looking for new candidates to come in. That way, we know that a lot of generations, it doesn't really matter that it's a younger generation that we seem to hear about a lot in the press that says they're very interested in flexible schedules. They certainly are, but that doesn't mean that baby boomers are not also as interested in having a flexible schedule. So make sure that you're marketing it to the outside. Another important aspect is really to help get your senior management and your managers on board, because they can be your champions, and the more that employees see not only that they support it, but maybe they even emulate it, then the employees will feel much more apt to ask for it. And that's really one of the key things, and I think I mentioned it earlier, that in the spectrum on the culture side, that those employees feel very comfortable going in and requesting flexibility. So that is one of the things that I would say would be very important to work towards in order to reap some of the rewards that I talked about earlier.
Well, like with most total rewards programs, you can offer it, but if employees don't truly value it and take advantage of it, it doesn't really serve to work to your advantage.
And that's a really good point, Allison, because I think that another thing that a lot of employees may not either feel comfortable with it or they may not even know that exists. So that is one of the issues when you don't have a formal policy. Of course, most times flexibility starts out in an informal process in an organization and kind of builds from there. But when you have that formal policy and employees then hear it through the communication, the regular communication modes within their organization, and they also are hearing from it from their managers and from their senior managers, then they start to feel more comfortable asking for it.
So flexibility seems to be here to stay. Telework, flex time, and part-time schedules top the list once again. Thanks for your insights, Rose. For WorkSpan TV, I'm Allison Avalos.
And I'm Rose Stanley.